Part 2. Love is the emblem of eternity. It confounds all notion of time, effaces all memory of a beginning, all fear of an end. Madame de Staël. Chapter 17. Morning. Like a morning dream, life becomes more and more bright the longer we live, and the reason of everything appears more clear. What has puzzled us before seems less mysterious, and the crooked paths look straighter. Jean-Paul Richter. Light peeked in through the boarded-up window in Jess's bedroom, and she opened her eyes instinctively, knowing that the daylight was wasting and there was much to be done today. Becca lay curled up next to her, hair sticky and moist with sweat from the fever she had been fighting for days. A small hand fisted the covers, and one leg lay over Jess. She slowly slid from the bed, quietly cursing the bitter cold that cut into her as soon as she left the warm layers of bed covers. Becca murmured and shifted, curling into a small ball. Jess pulled on a thick sweater and slid her socked feet into tattered and taped-over work boots. Her feet guided the way to the hall where the light did not, for the years spent in this house were many, and she knew each squeaky floorboard, each corner of furniture and doorway within it. Her hand was reaching for the doorknob of the door of the bedroom at the end of the hall when it opened, and 9-year-old Jacob spoke quietly in the darkness. "Mornin', Mom. How's Becca?" Jess sighed. "No change. I left her sleeping." "Breakfast or barn?" "Breakfast. Eggs, okay?" he replied. "Sounds fine." Jess reached out through the gloom and smoothed his hair with her hand. "Wake up the others, but tell them to be quiet and let Becca sleep." She walked through the living room and on through the kitchen and small pantry next to it. Next was the door leading to the barn. In a former life, it had been an attached 2-car garage, but now it was a shelter for the family's 2 goats, a large rabbit hutch, and feed supplies. Sounds of the others moving about in the house could be heard dimly through the walls, as Jess set about feeding each of the animals. Later, she would let the goats out into a corral to stretch their legs. After feeding came cleaning, and after that came her daily war with Satan, their female goat, for her meager pitcher of milk. Satan, as her name implied, came straight from hell and was meaner than any goat had any business being. Jess once again resolved to finish off the wretched creature as soon as she produced female offspring. Satan was also resolved not to ever produce anything but males. Consequently, her life and future seemed safely assured. Apple, the male goat, kept out of Satan's way and always seemed to have a henpecked, desperate look about his whiskered face. "Damn it, Satan!" Jess exclaimed as she wrestled the goat into place only to be sprayed by the first drops of milk she squeezed out. The goat had moved suddenly. As she wiped her boot off, the goat took the opportunity to swiftly nip the unprotected finger. "Son of a... Jesus!" Jess held her bleeding digit to her lips. "Goat curry, that's what I'm gonna make you." She waved her fist at the goat half-heartedly, knowing the threat was empty. The door to the garage swung open and Aaron stepped through, shutting it quickly so as to not let out what small amount of heat was emanating from the kitchen. Aaron was now 6 years old. There was a quiet maturity about the child that belied her tender age. Without a word, she took hold of Satan's head and offered the beast a withered crabapple. She was the only one in the family who could coax the blasted goat to stay still, and she was also the only one of them to never have been nipped, stepped on, or even so much as butted by Satan. Jess smiled and quickly began milking the goat, stopping only after the last drops of milk were squeezed out. Satan had long since finished the apple and was standing still patiently as Aaron stroked the recalcitrant beast's head and whiskered chin. The girl's eyes held the goat's gaze steadily, and it was as if they were speaking a silent language, telling secrets and exchanging memories with each other. "All done." Jess broke the silence. Aaron let go of Satan, and the goat instantly left to graze on the fresh feed set out for her. Jess reached over and smoothed the child's tangled hair with her hand and smiled down at Aaron. "Any words for me today, sweet Aaron?" she asked the girl, cupping her chin in her hand. The fey child only smiled and shook her head, saying nothing at all, and instead she held out her arms to be picked up and hugged. As always, Jess took Aaron in her arms and hugged her gently against her, marveling at how such a small creature could so silently charm all those around her, man and beast alike. Aaron had appeared on the doorstep over 2 years ago. Jess had rounded the front of the house, saw her crouched there, and instantly drew near, crouched down and gathered her in her arms. The trembling creature had wrapped her arms and legs around Jess and buried her face in Jess's neck. She had not uttered a word then, or in the 2 long years since. But where her voice failed, her eyes and hands spoke volumes, and she had instantly become part of their family, without question or reservation. The spring following Aaron's arrival, a body was discovered a mile to the east, along the creek bank. It was the remains of a man with red hair, much like Aaron's. He had been shot. There had been a well-loved teddy bear tucked inside a child-sized knapsack lying nearby. Thurman Banks had found the body and told Jess about it the following day as he brought by some potatoes in exchange for fresh eggs from the chicken coop Jess and the kids kept in the back of the house. He had buried the body where it lay, he said, and put up a rough cross for the unknown man. He looked over at the small, silent child sitting in the garden patch, placed the bear in her lap, and went away quietly with his eggs. He visited often and never failed to bring by something special for Aaron when he did, for the child had enchanted him. Jess gave Aaron another quick hug before setting her back on the ground. "Go help Jacob, sweetheart. He's in the chicken coop and surely having trouble with Maud and Beulah by now," she directed the child, envisioning her son struggling to get the eggs from 2 of the older, more aggressive hens. Maud and Beulah, like Satan, were destined for the stock pot one of these days, but they were still quite reliable layers, so Jess held off from ending them, despite the inevitable pecks and scratches they handed out so liberally. Aaron slipped away silently and headed out the side door toward the back of the house. Jess headed back inside the house and promptly ran into David, who was still rubbing his eyes, trying desperately to wake up. "Morning, Jess," he said, yawning, wincing as he saw her bloody finger. "Satan get you again?" Jess nodded and headed for the medicine cabinet to dose her injured finger with iodine, leaning in first for a peck on the cheek from the young man as she passed by. David was now 20 years old, and his hair was nearly shoulder length, dark brown and tousled, his eyes a soft, friendly brown. Like the rest of their hodgepodge family, he was of slender build. Obesity had all but disappeared in the past decade when food was scarce, and most lived at bare subsistence level. Though harvests were better now, they were still far from being safe from starvation if a winter came early enough or lasted too long. "So, what's on tap for today? Lessons, hunting, or washing?" David asked, as Jess busied herself lighting a small fire under one burner. "Well, we could use some meat, or even fish if you could get them to bite. Take Jake. He's itching to get out there and do manly things." Jess winked at him and David snorted and nodded. I'll see how far Aaron and I can get with the wash, but make sure and gather it up for me, okay? Then maybe some lessons for Jake tonight if you two don't get back too late." Jacob slipped in as she was talking. "Huntin'? Really? Right on." Then his face managed to twitch into a somewhat serious expression. "But, Mom, you know how far we have to go out to get anything. It might be real late when we get back. We might not have time for lessons tonight." He tried unsuccessfully to look disappointed. Jess turned and gave him a look. "Well then, perhaps, young Jacob, you should stay here with me and help with laundry and still have plenty of time for your lessons afterwards. It seems to me that you should be farther along in that book by now, and your math needs work too." Jacob practically stumbled over himself, getting his objections out. In the end, it was a wail. "But, Mom—" She raised an eyebrow. "So I can depend on you being back by sundown?" He nodded excitedly. "Glad to hear it. Now be sure to pack a lunch for the two of you while breakfast gets cooked, and wear your warm wool socks that I made you." As he prepared to launch himself like a rocket into the living room and on through into his bedroom, she called out in a loud whisper, "And quietly. Becca's still sleeping."